Okay, welcome back. This is our continuing, this is part 2 of our lecture on line for Unit 2 in the Design 1 class. When we last left off, we were covering how do lines create value. We talked about how just the width of a mark can change how much value it creates. We talked about how the line weight, the pressure that you put, right, and therefore the lightness or darkness of the mark. But also a mark can change in value just simply by which kind of tool you use. If you use like a really light ink versus a dark ink, or a gray versus a black, right? That will change its value. Okay, so there is one other way. If you had to make a composition and they were told, okay, you need to do, you have to make this composition, I want you to make as much value contrast as possible. It has to be completely abstract, no imagery, right? And it has to be made entirely out of straight lines. And it has to have as much contrast of value as possible. How would you create that much value contrast?
I don't know.
You got any ideas, Lucy?
No.
Lennon, you got any ideas?
I am not.
All right, okay. Well, let me give you a thought. All right.
Are you going back to
The spacing of lines?
Yeah, very good, London. Right? Like, see how this area there is darker than there, right? Just because it's got a bunch of lines. But this area is darker than that because although the lines are basically the same weight as
They're
that,
closer together.
they're closer together, right? Okay, and we can call that creating value through mark repetition.
Yes.
Creating value through mark repetition.
Or through texture or pattern. It's all basically,
Pattern and repetition.
and so what this is what I'm doing right there is basically a form of hatching, which is a drawing term.
What
Right?
does it mean?
It just means to put down marks all going in one direction.
Okay.
And when you would be drawing, there's something called cross hatching, which is this.
Kind of.
So we could, if we had areas, we could build up lots and lots of value just by continually layering the marks in lots of different directions.
Yep.
And with each time we add a new direction, we are decreasing the amount of white space that's left, right?
And it
And
makes
therefore
it thicker.
creating a sense of that area being darker.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Now, we're going to talk, so we've covered values. Let's say you had to make a composition where you had to make shapes, but you were not allowed to create shapes. You could only make shapes with lines, and you were not allowed to create the shapes, right?
Yeah.
Through the obvious way, which is delineation.
What
Right?
is that?
Okay, I'll explain. Okay, so you have to create shapes using lines. Think about ways you could create shapes using lines, but not this way.
Not literally drawing shape.
Right, not literally drawing one line going all the way around. So what are other ways that we can create shapes? Specifically, what are other ways we can create shapes using line?
How come you all keep looking at me?
Because
I'm
you're
gonna give
very
you-
smart.
Yeah, I want to give you a chance to answer. You could create a shape with the hatching or cross hatching technique, right?
Very good, right? Let's try that with a triangle, right? Okay, so we can make a triangle clearly a shape that way. Any other thoughts?
What about that?
Cross.
Measured space?
What is space?
Right, okay, so two ideas came up right there, the cross hatching. So let's say we wanted to make an image where we had a sense of two triangles, right? And so we did the same thing we just did before. And then we made a smaller triangle that's darker. So we could use that counter hatching or counter lines going in different directions as a way to create even more shapes. But we could also create a triangle going this way. Or some sort of shape. Probably not going to be all that solid a triangle, but it will be a shape.
It's two triangles. I mean, actually, yeah, it's a triangle.
It's more like it's a hat.
It's a mountain.
It's a mountain. I drew a mountain. Okay?
Alright.
You see the negative space?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have one just simply by the pattern repetition of marks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same idea as what we already talked about, or through adding extra layering of marks, right? Like that. Or through negative space. Oh, I don't need to put that S there. Okay. Any other thoughts about any other ways that we could maybe create a shape using lines without literally
drawing a triangle?
exactly.
No.
Well, there are some other sneaky ways. Like let's say,
Sneaky.
right, you did this. You had a line going there, and then you had a bunch of lines going this way. So you had like a sense of like a pretty definite edge right there, and then some lines going that way. And then you also had a really dark line going there, and then a sharp dark line right there, and then another line, maybe some lines going in this direction, kind of light.
It's kind of like making a triangle, but in another object.
Right, so we see that triangle right there,
Yeah.
right? And I'm basically using the same rules of implied lines, right? In that I'm not finishing the triangle in places, but I'm letting the edge of this thing be one edge of the triangle. I'm letting that really heavy line be another edge of that triangle. It really helped that I made that extra corner. You know, like without that corner, it might have been hard for us to really see it, but by having one corner placed, right, then all of a sudden our eye can go, oh yeah. In fact, you can make a triangle this way.
Yeah. With all the corners.
Right.
So is that the same as implied line?
Triangle.
Yeah, and these are all types of implied shapes,
Okay.
right? Okay, so yeah, these are all implied shapes, and most of them are using implied line as part of that. Okay, all right. I got to look at the first page just for a second to see if there's anything else we need to cover. Ooh, we got about a minute left. All right, I think that's pretty much it. The last thing I want everyone to think about is, ahead of my next lecture, is think about what happens, two things. What happens when you really vary your line weight, like I demonstrated before, right? I want you to think about that and how much you can vary and change not only the weight of line, but what we might call the character of line, right? That a line can go from being very regular, to very fluid, to very angular, right? And it can change in terms of how much it shifts from light to dark. We could even do it more so. Watch this. Right? With a piece of Conte, you
That's
can get
really cool.
you can get lines like that. All right. And then the other thing I want you to think about is the idea of, we talked about this in class, right? We talked about how marks, I got time, I'm going to do this. Marks can either be regular, and this is, that could be, you know, lines or shapes, or marks can be regular or irregular. Right? And regularity of line and of mark is something that we're always thinking about. What I want you to think about is how you can take any kind of irregular line, and you could then start thinking about how to regularize it. How to turn that irregularity into something more controlled. So sometimes the most interesting types of lines are not the purely regular, the purely geometric, or the extremely, you know, frighteningly irregular, but the ones that are in between, that look at something very irregular, look at something like real life, actual contours, but then comes up with a much more regularized version of it. Okay, we're gonna end there.